97.3 ESPN, Eagles insider, NFL columnist for FanRagSports.com. John McMullen joins us with a look at some NFL news you can use. And we'll get your thoughts last night, John. I'm sure you watched the national championship game to give us a little bit of an overview from your perspective. You look at guys that might be pros in that game. I'm interested in your thought on guys like Watson. Obviously, Williams looked like a guy that you might be considering in the first round if you need a wide receiver. Just give us some overviews on how you were watching that game last night.
Yeah, namely it was Deshaun Watson because there's so many divergent views on him as a prospect. When you talk about the NFL, some people think he's worthy of being near the number one overall selection, a top 3 type pick. Others have him going from 10 to 12. And it really is an interesting dichotomy, but it's very early in the process. You know, you have to go through, obviously, the combine. You have to go through the pro days, and we've seen wild swings in the past, most notably recently would be Teddy Bridgewater, who, if you go back to that year, at this point, he would have been the number 1 overall pick, and he falls all the way to number 32. So a lot of the process is still to go, but I think, obviously, the way he played last night, especially the last 2 drives, under such circumstance on that type of stage, that's only going to make people, look at Deshaun Watson in a positive fashion, because it doesn't matter if it's the NFL playoffs. The stage gets no bigger than the national championship game against Nick Saban in Alabama. So he proved a lot on those last 2 drives, and I think when it's all said and done, he's certainly going to be a top 10 pick.
John, how much do you think a guy like Dak Prescott will sway some people when they think about what Watson can accomplish?
Yeah, it might. I mean, the concern with NFL people is the college game in general, not over the physical skill set of certain quarterbacks, and certainly Watson would be on that list. A guy like Deshaun Kaiser in Notre Dame would also be on that list. We talked about it in the past on this show a lot. The way the college game has morphed in the past really 5 years to a completely spread-based offensive system at so many universities, it doesn't really translate for an easy road to the NFL, because basically you're learning sort of simple things in the past. You have to learn them at the pro level. Even for certain quarterbacks, taking the snap from under center is foreign to them. And they literally have to learn it at the professional level, something they would have mastered in high school, forget about college, a generation ago. And I think that's the bigger deal. And when you try to look at Dak Prescott's success and put that on other players, I don't know if you can do it, because the thing about Dak, and to me, it's an 8. I mean, he's just so calm in just about every situation. And he rarely gets rattled. And when he makes a bad play, he forgets about it. That's rare kind of stuff when you're talking about young quarterbacks.
Greg Lewis gets fired yesterday. That only puts the receiving woes of the Eagles back into the spotlight. If Williams is there for the Eagles at 14 or 15, of course, they haven't had that coin flip yet. Their pick hasn't been determined yet. But is he a guy that you consider taking, or do you think he's gone by then?
I think he's going to be right in that range, so it's going to be interesting. I think what the Eagles need more than anything else, and maybe even more than cornerbacks, which they certainly need, is a playmaker. And if that's Mike Williams, great. If it's Cook, the running back from Florida State, he might be in that range, great. But they need some explosiveness on offense to obviously complement and make things easier from Carson Wentz. The most difficult thing to do as an NFL offense is to go on those 13, 14 play, 80, 85-yard drives, because that's when opposing defenses have more opportunities to get you to make mistakes. And how you combat that is the big play. And whether it's a 40-yard strike that gets you downfield or a 40-yard run. And the Eagles didn't have any of that, basically, this season. And we don't have to go back too far in history when we always talk about Deshaun Jackson being here, and this team led the NFL in explosive plays of 20 yards or more. It's completely flipped over to the opposite end. They're one of the worst teams in football at doing that, and they have to correct it.
Could get into DeLorean.
And that was Howie's throat to take a little shot at Chip Kelly. But come on, we're piling on Chip at this point. Howie should be a gracious winner. Chip's going to be back in college at Cal.
Oh, there you go. I threw that out the other day. Josh squashed it on me. Said Cal doesn't have enough money to afford Chip.
No, they have the money. I mean, the question is, I think from Chip's standpoint is you have to sit down and make a decision. Do you really want to be an NFL coach? If you really, really want to be an NFL coach, not only do you have to sort of temper the ego and take a coordinator job, you also have to change your whole philosophy, because there is a head coach in this league that would, A, want someone who's acted like Chip Kelly's employee, and B, even if he was a model employee, they wouldn't want his offense. So he would have to be open to tweaking into a completely different coach, and we've seen no evidence of that. So that's A, and B, if he wants to go back to college, you might want to wait because obviously every year in the college game, high-profile jobs open up, and there might be a bigger job next year where he could go, because I think at the college level he would be sort of an A-plus hire. And I don't think even anybody thinks he wouldn't be a complete success at the college level, even if it is Cal. And they can scrounge up enough money. The question is, does Chip Kelly want it, and do they want it?
Yeah, it's interesting because what happens to his, all the contracts if he goes to college? I mean, does he still get paid? Is that a decision he has to make? Like, do I want to work, or does that void the other contracts, or is he still getting paid by San Francisco, and Philadelphia owes him some money too, right?
Yeah, he's still getting paid. He's got 4 years left on his 49ers contract, so that'll be one of the worst signings of a coaching deal ever in the NFL. They have to pay him. Some NFL coaching contracts have offset language that if you get a job, you only pay the difference. In this case, that wouldn't be the case, and Chip's getting paid by the 49ers. And so one thing you can't criticize him for is having a bad agent, because he got a heck of a deal.
Sure did, and we'll talk, about where he ends up a little bit later on, of course, down the road, to see if he ends up on his feet or is Chip Kelly out of football. Kind of hard to believe that a guy who had that big of a star on his back could be completely out of the game this coming season. Adam Kaplan tweeting, the Eagles have strong interest in Bills wide receivers coach Sanjay Lal. Sources confirming that. And apparently they're looking for an experienced coach, a guy that can work with some of these young receivers. He would be interesting because the Bills can block him, but they don't have a coach or anybody to kind of decide whether they want to keep him on board. So it seems that is a very interesting inquiry right there.
Yeah, and I saw that report and I looked at Lal's background to see. Now he's certainly an older coach. He's 47. But he really doesn't have much more experience as a wide receivers coach than Greg Lewis, who's been doing it for a very short period of time. I think he's been handling wide receivers for 5 years. So is that a step up from Greg Lewis? A little bit, but it still, to me, doesn't fit the definition of a really, really experienced coach that is going to help this group with fundamentals. So I think if Lowell ends up being the guy, I think it speaks to more of the fact that they were unhappy with Greg Lewis and how he handled his job, and that sort of experience talk is sort of shielding things. But it's all semantics because, again, you can take the greatest wide receiver coach in history, and he wasn't going to get much out of this wide receiving group the Eagles had this season.
No, he wasn't. Not even a DeLorean would have helped out this wide receiver crew.
Maybe it would have got him a little more deep speed. 0 to 60.
That's right. It's a shame that they have taken receivers, first round Aguilar, second round with Matthews, third round with Huff, and virtually got minimal return on that investment because, there are years where you say, hey, you need to get a receiver in the first round, and it goes back to Williams. Like you've talked about it. They got to get a playmaker. They have to hit a home run with this first pick. They can't get a guy who just might be good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they got to get a guy who's starting week one, and not only starting, but is capable of giving them that explosiveness on the offensive side. And I think if that happens, all of a sudden the other parts start to fit in place because I think Jordan Matthews is a capable receiver in this league. And if he's a number 2 or a slot option, I think all of a sudden with somebody else like a Williams getting all the attention, I think he only gets better. I think Zach Ertz only gets better in that kind of circumstance. So I think it's really, really important that they're capable and they do get that player. I mean, this is a very important draft, and that's why Howie Roseman already deserves some accolades for getting that pick back from Minnesota and making the trade because that will go down as a great trade for the Eagles.
Sure is. We were talking about this the other night. Could you imagine if the Eagles didn't have that first-round pick? You would almost feel like the Brooklyn Nets all of a sudden, right? You had a terrible season, and yet you have no hope because you don't even have a first-round draft pick. That goes back to show, all right, even if you didn't like the Bradford trade, if you thought that he might have helped this team be a little bit better, they weren't going to win the Super Bowl with Bradford, and you looked like you got a even at worst-case scenario, a comparable quarterback, and you got the first-round pick. So that goes back to like the autonomy of your overview of Roseman. That trade almost trumps everything he did.
Yeah, I agree. And the biggest part to me is the fact that at the time, you knew Sam, no matter what the lip service was, you knew Sam wasn't going to be here this season, this upcoming season. So he was a lame duck. So to get that kind of value for a player that everybody in this league knows isn't in your plans, and you're going to get rid of him after the season anyway, it was tremendous. And there's no other way to look at it. And I know a lot of people look at what Sam did in Minnesota because he had a very good statistical season and played very well and said, hey, maybe the Eagles are on the cusp of the playoffs if he has a similar season here. And maybe they are. But I don't think long-term that helped this team very much because you hit the nail on the head. If this same group, just adding Sam Bradford is here, but Sam is on his way out the door, Carson Wentz at that point hasn't started one game, and you don't have a first-round pick to really kind of try at least to start to fix these skill position woes, it doesn't look very good right now.
John McMullen with us, NFL columnist for FanRagSports.com. I want to go back to that Bills wide receivers coach, Sanjay Lal, because Sammy Watkins had some comments about him today saying that that's the one guy I don't want to leave. If he leaves, I don't know how my mindset would be, honestly. That's a guy that groomed me into running routes and doing everything the right way, mentally, both mental and physical. If he leaves, that will hurt. I mean, here's a player passionately coming out for his coach. Does that raise an eyebrow in John McMullen's world?
A little bit. I mean, it's certainly a positive. I saw that same quote. It is nice to get that kind of a belief from a player who's got a lot of skill and a lot of talent, even though he hasn't been able to stay on the field consistently. in Sammy Watkins. So, and certainly the route running part of it is a positive, because I think that has been a struggle for a lot of the Eagles receivers, and maybe they weren't being groomed as they should be. But I wouldn't expect a miracle worker is all I'm trying to say, because to blame all this on Greg Lewis is, to me, it's reaching. I mean, maybe he's not the best coach in the world. I know a lot of people automatically assume he wasn't a very good receiver, so how could he coach receivers? Nonsense like that. And that's fine if you want to blame it on him, but I'm telling you, the talent just isn't there, and he didn't have much to work with, and the cupboard is bare, and they need to add. They need to go grocery shopping. And then maybe then a coach like Law could be successful.
I did see that the Jaguars let go of their wide receivers coach. I guess I've never paid attention or deep enough attention to how key the position coaches can be. To me, when I heard the news that Greg Lewis got fired, I initially thought, oh, maybe they'll bring Harold Carmichael back. He knew how to catch the football. Or they do like a baseball thing where they brought the Larry Durker down from the booth, and maybe they'd bring down Michael Quick from the radio booth or something like that. I didn't know that the wide receiver coaches were so in demand, but it seems like there's a microscope on these guys now.
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, guys like that. I mean, Harold's basically at practice every day anyway. I mean, it's always good to have guys like that around, but yeah, I mean, the coach in this league, you have to make it your profession. You have to learn. It's about technique. Often, as you know, Pete, great players in any sport, like Harold Carmichael was, often they aren't good coaches because the game was too easy for them. And they were so talented that often they can't impart it to other players who might be less talented, and it becomes difficult for them. So you have to learn the technique. You have to learn how to manage people. You have to learn how to get through to many, many different personalities. So, yeah, it's always a difficult job, any position coach in the NFL. The problem with the league as a whole, and you generally don't hear, we're using the wide receiver coach as a scapegoat. It happens in every city. I mean, Cleveland, Jimmy Haslam, after a 1-15 season, said he thought they were going in the right direction with Hugh Jackson, the head coach, and Sashi Brown, the vice president of football operations. And so they're moving forward, but all of a sudden, a couple days later, they fired the defensive coordinator, Ray Horton. So he was the scapegoat. Every team that doesn't have success has a scapegoat. We just talked about Sam Bradford. Sam had a great season. The Vikings just fired their quarterback's coach.
They did, however, take the interim tag off Pat Shurmur.
They did, and he's going to be the offensive coordinator. But every team has a scapegoat, at least every team that doesn't go as far as they think they should. And it's generally going to be on the coaching staff somewhere.
I did find it amusing, John, that all the video, like, when the Greg Lewis news broke and, for example, Comcast had to pull video, all the video they had in every frame, the receiver that he was working with the most, or the video they had, was Nelson Aguilar, explaining to him, you have to look at the referee to see if you're actually onside. That was one big clip. And then even when they went to a practice clip at the NovaCare complex, who was front and center, right, with G. Lou? G. Lou was like, get out of the way, 17. Let me step in there and show you how to do this. And that still wasn't enough to save his job.
Yeah, well, it tells you how, the microscope was on Nelson Aguilar because of the fact he was a first-round pick and because of the fact he struggled. So basically, almost after every game, he had a big drop or something that went wrong, and so the cameras were focused on him. So they probably had plenty of B-roll on Nelson Aguilar. That's how that happened.
Let me just interject this question real fast. How do you surmise that Roseman comes out and says, we knew we weren't going to give an extension to Eric Rowe. We knew it after 1 year, and they trade him. And yet they decipher, and he was a second-round pick, they decipher that, we think that there's still something in Aguilar here. Like, it seems that the way things are like that had to be a lie, right? Like there had to be something else there because you can't decipher that Rowe can't play anymore, but you keep hanging on waiting for Aguilar.
Yeah, I mean, the issue is one is out of the organization and one remains in it. So I think they would love to trade Nelson Aguilar. They can't cut him because cutting him, they would cost more money on the cap than keeping him. But I think they would love to move him if that's possible. And to do that, you have to kind of talk him up and say there's a possibility he can develop. I said on the show, the Eric Rowe explanation was insane. I mean, that was the worst part of Howie's season-ending press conference. I mean, that was ludicrous. And even if you want to take out of the equation that he's played well in New England, the fact that you're saying we've made a decision on a player who's played 1 year on his rookie contract and was a second-round pick, why are you making that decision? You don't have to make that decision until 2 years down the line. So maybe he wasn't ready to play in Jim Schwartz's defense, but maybe he could have learned. So I thought that explanation was crazy because even if you rewind and talk about Aguilar after the bad rookie season, I don't recall anybody saying, maybe outside of the fan that doesn't understand the mechanics of roster building and contracts in this league, I didn't hear anyone saying the Eagles should move on from Nelson Aguilar because it was just one season. Now, if Rowe was completely lost in the second season and you're saying that same thing, okay. But to say it after year one, and by the way, he played pretty well at times as a rookie. I thought it was a crazy explanation, and it didn't make much sense at all.
John, real quick before we let you go, I saw an interesting NFL tweet a couple minutes ago. It says, raise your hand if you thought 2 years ago the Raiders would receive approval on a Las Vegas stadium before the Chargers had a deal in San Diego. I'd like to get your reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange. I mean, the NFL works so hard. They didn't want to leave either market. They didn't want to leave San Diego. They don't want to leave Oakland. And they fought and fought and fought. So it's a surprise to me on both ends of the spectrum. And the Chargers have to the 15th to declare their intentions. But, hey, if you reach the end of the road and the partner, in this case the cities, aren't willing to get involved at all, at some point you got to take the tether off the organizations and allow them to do what they want to do.
All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen. Follow him on Twitter. A lot of NFL news still that we haven't hit on. We'll get to throughout the week. The Raiders look like they need a new offensive coordinator. Bill Musgrave not expected to return. They had the 6th-ranked offense in the league, so some news there. Also, you look at some coaching interviews. You've got, Vance Joseph interviewing for the Broncos job. Sean McDermott interviewing for the 49ers job today. So a lot of coaching stuff still needs to be crossed off the list, and we just told you Musgrave. So, and also some reports that Ventnor's Greg Roman could be the next quarterback coach with the Browns. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. At JF McMullen on Twitter. Thanks, John.
Hey, thanks, guys.